We've been looking at the man named Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob. And this young boy who started off at 17 years old with a dream. God gave him a dream. And he, in his youthfulness, became a little proud, and his brothers despised him. His two brothers wanted to kill him. And as you know, they plotted to kill him. And God turned away the plot, but he had another plan, a God plan. And although he got thrown into the pit, he was to be tested in that pit. That Joseph, on the way to his destiny, when we are on the way to our destiny, when we are in our journey, there are things in our life that will be challenged and tested. And so we're looking at the test that Joseph went through because we all will share in those tests. Because God also challenges us with our pride. Wants us to be completely dependent on him and realize he's the one of the giver of dreams, isn't he? He's the one who gives us our destiny. So we will be tried in that. And so they threw him in the pit, and as you know, they decided, well, let's not kill him. Although the father, Jacob, believed that he was dead, right? He believed that lie for almost 20 years, which is a message in itself of how devastating it can be when we believe, but we believe a lie, and we believe the wrong thing. But he was, as you know, his brothers sold him, pulled him out of the pit, decided not to kill him, decided to sell him to some passing by Ishmaelites who were coming by. And so they sold Joseph to them for 20 pieces of silver. And so those guys then proceeded to take him to Egypt. And it's there that they also sold him to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And it was to be another step, another entryway, another process that God was going to work. God was behind all of this. So Joseph went from the pit, but he went to the palace. Does that mean things got better? Not necessarily. He was still a slave. Although his surroundings, his environment had changed, yet his heart was still in that place where he had no life of his own. He was not free. He was in bondage. He was in slavery. But the question is, even in that state, how did he conduct himself? I'm amazed at the maturity of Joseph, frankly. Yes, I know at 17, he was a bragger. He was full of pride and arrogance. And, he was blessed, he was favored, and he knew he was. And he didn't handle that well. But yet at the same time, there was something built into Joseph, even before he got to the palace, that was very special, that a lot of 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds never learn. And that is how to serve another person. That is how to lay down his rights and understand his true position. Amazing maturity. So we're going to look at today is called the palace test. It's there in the palace that Joseph learned faithful stewardship. Stewardship. And this is really a lot of question about our integrity. Do you know what your integrity is? Your integrity is the real person when no one's looking, or lack thereof. Integrity or non-integrity, what are you when no one's looking? I'm sure we've all gone through situations in real life where You go into a store and you pay for something and someone gives you some change and you realize they gave you way too much change. You ever been in that situation? Have you had to exercise, hopefully, your integrity and be honest and come clean and say, you know what? I believe you gave me too much. You know, I do go to coffee shops a lot. I do go to Starbucks. I actually, since I've had Jeter, I go to Pete's quite a bit. And of course, through that repetition, you're going to go through times when they don't always get it right. And I can tell you, I could have had several free cups of coffee by now. Maybe a little bit harder thing is when it costs you more. Wonder if you backed your car into somebody and you just nicked their bumper. You have a decision to make. Or do you have a decision to make? Maybe it's a no-brainer. Maybe it's just you're just so forthcoming. It's like, well, of course I leave a note. Of course I have to, take responsibility. It's not mine. I damaged somebody else's property. So this is all about really good, faithful stewardship, caring for that which belongs to someone else. And it really tests your integrity. Jesus said this, and I'm going to paraphrase it. You'll have this on the slide, the paraphrase. If you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? And we've heard the stories of, renters are disrespectful. You know why? Because they don't respect stewardship of caring for something that is not their own and caring for it not just as if it were their own, but even better than as if it were their own. When you go into a place of leaving it even better than the way you found it, blessing them, really serving them, really going over the top. Jesus really taught going over the top, going past what is required. I'm not even talking about what is required. I'm talking about even going beyond what is required, because that's the gospel. That's the grace of God. He didn't just do what's required, but he went beyond that. He hears my voice. Let me read it to you out of Luke 16 out of the CEV. Anyone who can be trusted with little matters can also be trusted in important matters. Anyone who's dishonest in little matters will be dishonest in important matters. You cannot be trusted with this wicked wealth. Who will trust you with true wealth? And if you cannot be trusted with what belongs to someone else, who will give you something that will be your own? When I was studying this, I was doing my daily Bible reading, and I was struck by this. This won't be in the slides, but I was struck by this, and I wanted to share this too. This is in 2 Kings 22. It's another example of trusting a steward, giving them responsibility, giving them worth, giving them value, and actually trusting them. See, in some ways, we're so far removed from this now, you can't have anything without writing between two people. It used to be your word was good enough. None of us have ever lived that kind of life, but I was taught that. I was taught that from from my previous generation. That I can still hear my mother saying, son, a man is only as good as his word. And a word is good enough. That's trust. That's trust with what is another. His word is good, so he has that integrity, that honesty. That is so foreign to us right now. And if you presented this to another generation right now, this generation, wow, that would sound very, very supernatural. That would sound totally divine, not natural. But it used to be not just spiritual. No, it was actually normal and natural within the morality of people's hearts. They didn't need God to be that kind of person. But I ran into this in 2 Kings 22. This is after there was revival going on, and King Josiah, when he was 8 years old, became king. 10 years later, when he was 18 years old, he had cleaned things up, and there was great revival going on. He had torn out all the idols and all the Baal worship, and it was one of those good times in Israel's history. Josiah was one of those good kings, righteous kings. It says Josiah had been king for 18 years, so he told Shaphan, one of his highest officials, go to the Lord's temple and ask Hilkiah, the high priest, to collect from the guards all the money that the people have donated. Tell Hilkiah to give it to the men supervising the repairs to the temple. So he's telling the priests to go to the workmen and collect all the money that they've collected and give it to them. They can use some of the money to pay the workers, and with the rest of it, they can buy wood and stone for the repair work. And then it says this, they are honest, so we won't ask them to keep track of the money. Wow. Can we imagine that? Holding no one accountable for the distribution of money or possessions? That's revival, folks. That was just another sign of revival. With Joseph, the test of his stewardship of all things after he came out of the pit, his first test after the pit that he had to face was stewardship. So we're going to pick it up in Genesis 39. If you have Bibles on your device or in your hand in written form, here we go. Genesis 39, 1-6. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Here's a key phrase. The Lord was with Joseph. And he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Is there something wrong with that phrase? He was successful. Well, wait a minute. He's a slave. He's in prison. He has no life of his own. He has no possessions of his own. He has nothing to mark success. What does he have that marks success? What is it? Was success found in his heart the fact that God favored him, blessed him, was with him? God wanted to be with Joseph. God wanted to hang out with Joseph. Is that success or what? It doesn't matter what his surroundings were. The same God that was with him in the pit is the same God that's with him in the palace, the same God that's with him as a slave in the Egyptian's house, in a foreign land with a foreign master, and put there with absolutely no ties, no connections, no ownership of anything. And yet the Lord was with him. Something is going on here. Because what happens here is, it wasn't just Joseph knowing that God was with him. Others saw it too. A pagan, an absolute pagan, an Egyptian god worshiper, a man who maybe worshipped flies and lice and frogs and the Nile River, worshipped animals, as pagan as you can get. And yet Joseph came into his house and it was like, whoa, this slave is not like any slave. Don't think Joseph was the only slave he had. This one was brought into his house. He was brought in, promoted to be right in the center. I don't know, maybe even when he was drawn out of the pit. What do you think? When he was drawn out of the pit, and then he was given to the Ishmaelites, and then when they brought him over to Potiphar, they presented him to Potiphar, and Potiphar looked at him and thought, this guy's worth a high price. I don't know what there is about it, but this guy, I have a place for him. This guy's, he's not serving outside the house, he's serving in the house. Because I think Potiphar maybe even perceived something in him then because of what happened in the pit. That Joseph did come out perhaps as a different man and took another step forward in his character, his integrity. And he obviously got a little more humble, and compliant. And so here he comes, and so Potiphar, he must have recognized it because it's written here. It says his master saw that the Lord was with him. What would your life be like if all of a sudden there are people, pagans, ungodly people, but yet they are seeing something on you, and what they are seeing on you is God's presence. In the spirit, all of a sudden, their eyes are being opened that, oh, God is with him. And that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. And he began to watch it manifest itself. This guy, he seems to have God with him, even though he didn't know his God. And it bore witness because everything Joseph did was of excellence. It had a touch of the miraculous. It had a touch of the supernatural. It had a touch of the Holy Spirit of God upon it. God comes in, breathes on the man and through the man. That everything, you've heard it of King Midas with the Midas touch. This is not King Midas. This is Joseph the servant, the young boy who decides he's going to serve another. So Joseph found favor in his sight, Potiphar's sight, and he served him. Then he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put under his authority. I'm telling you, there was no written contract. You don't have to have a written contract with a slave anyway. You just figure, the slave will do whatever I tell him to do anyway. But I am actually going to delegate and designate him to be over everything. And I'm going to trust him. I'm not going to come back and say, hey, how you doing? No, I don't want to have to worry about anything. This guy, I can trust him with my life. I can trust him with everything. And yes, he even trusted him with his own wife. Yes, he did. He didn't put anything in place. You can see that. Joseph finds that out the hard way. But nevertheless, that's what I mean. He had carte blanche to everything. What's mine is yours, Joseph. What's mine is yours. I trust you with everything. There it is. You're a man that God is with you. And I can see that everything, I can see that the best favor I could do for myself is to embrace you fully. Because I know whatever happens to you, it's going to happen for me. It's going to happen for me. Do you realize this? This was the Abrahamic covenant happening. Don't forget Abraham's covenant. Don't forget what God said to Abraham. I'm going to give you many sons and daughters. I'm going to give them to you. And I'm going to bless those that bless you. And I'm going to curse those who curse you. And Potiphar decided he's blessing and he's getting blessed. And he will keep on getting blessed. But that's Potiphar. He made him overseer. So it was from that time that he made him overseer of his house. And all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. There it is. It wasn't because of Potiphar. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field, not just in the house, outside too. Then he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. In other words, Potiphar only was concerned with one care of the day. When do I get to eat? That's it. Sounds like a man, huh? Sounds like a man that all he wants to care about is when is the next meal, man. And everything else is right there in Joseph's hands. I don't need to worry about anything. And it's all getting blessed. It's all good. And then it just puts this little tag in here to segue into the next part of this, which we'll get into later. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. That was actually important that God put that in there. But nevertheless. So, I mean, the guy's just totally blessed. Come on. He's endowed with so much. This guy's got it all. The presence of God and everything that comes with it. Because Joseph, think about it. Joseph was just promoted everywhere he went. We're going to see that. But Joseph had this built-in sense and knowledge enough to know that it's no longer him. His pride really was broken. It really was. His pride being broken released him to serve another. I will bow. I will give. I will sacrifice. I will do whatever it is. You know what? All I ever want is to bless this other person. I don't even care about myself anymore. No, he didn't. He was in Potiphar's house, and all he wanted to attend to was Potiphar's welfare and everything he had. He understood. He didn't work for the Pharaoh. He didn't work for Potiphar. He didn't work later on. These are later on. He didn't work for the prison keeper. He didn't work for anybody else except God. Because he really believed as he would serve, he was giving himself to God. Because even that, I believe, with the revelation intuitively in his heart, he knew that even what Potiphar had, what Egypt had, whatever, all these riches, all of this stuff, It never belonged to anybody except God. He saw that. So, I'll tell you what's freedom. Freedom is when you can settle it in your heart and believe it with all your heart that you really are living your life for the audience of one. You really are giving yourself and working only for the pleasure of one. And everybody else in its pathway will be blessed and be pleasured because you believe that. They will be blessed by your faith. They will be blessed by your perception. Prosperity. Everything he did. Because here's the thing too. Can we get to the place when we can serve the Lord regardless of the reward or lack thereof? When we can serve the Lord for the lack of reward, and here's the hard one, nobody notices. See, Joseph was in such a place. He had such an attitude of serving that it didn't matter who saw him, who knew about it, and yet he gets put in the Bible. But it didn't matter to him to serve without notice or reward. I want to talk to you a little bit about prosperity, prospering, because this is what was going on. Joseph caused the house of Potiphar to prosper. And everywhere he touched, there was prosperity. A slave, but prosperity came. And unfortunately, I think prosperity, yes, we know all the stories. All the bad press about the prosperity message. But may we never throw this out, because it's pure, it's holy, it's God. It is what he does, and it is what we want. We want prosperity. So just looking up the words, just look at the word of prosper, prospering, prosperous. Let's look at this for a second. It's not a 4-letter word. It's not a bad word. It's really not. We can start using it again. You can start praying it again. Because that's what God wants you to do. And that's exactly what the enemy would not want you to do. Because what does he do? He is the thief. What's he going to steal? Your prosperity. That which God gives you. So let's look at this for a second. It's a good message. Let me read Genesis 26. What does it say? What does it say about Isaac? It says Isaac sowed in the land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. Then it says this. The man, Isaac, began to prosper. Say began to prosper. Okay. It had a beginning. And then it says, and continued prospering. Say continued prospering. Until he became very prosperous. Say very prosperous. So it begins, it continues, and it becomes. This is how God worked. Because this is prosperity. It has a life of its own. It's got its own DNA. It can't help itself. It goes forward. It excels. It progresses. When the prosperity of God is sent into your life, it's alive. It's alive. It's real. So, look at the Hebrew word for prosperity. This just simply means to push forward. To push forward. It's this idea that when God prospers, You begin to prosper, you continue to prosper, you are very prosperous. God is pushing you forward. It's progressive. It's an advancement. It's a promotion. It's moving forward, not backward, not sideways. This is a good thing, that you may prosper, move forward, even as your soul, John says, prospers, moves forward. So then put that together with the Greek word. The Greek meaning there is simply to help on the road. So what happens if this is what Joseph was doing? Joseph, everything he did for another was prospering him. So he would actually take Potiphar's possessions and everything, and it was a push forward. It was help along the road. That's what you do as a minister, to prosper other people. That's what we want to do at Lifeheart. That's what we wanted to do with Apprentices. That's what we want to do with the new generation, to cause them to move from one level to another level, from one place to another place. And when they are pushed forward, yes, the word push, it is kind of, it's good. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. And to push and to help along the road. All right. So I'm going to have to go through these next few a little quicker. What is it that causes you to prosper? What is the key to prospering? The key to prospering, here it is. The key to prospering is the presence of the Lord. When the presence of God is on your life, guess what comes with it? The prospering of God. He pushes you forward. He comes into you. Back in the 70s, we said people got saved, and there was a phrase coined called redemption lift. Did you ever hear that phrase? It's an old phrase. I know all of us old timers, we remember it because Pastor Gentile would always talk about it. You know, oh, you get saved, you're experiencing redemption lift. But what he's really saying is this: we were experiencing the presence of God, and out of the presence of God is the prosperity, and the prosperity is getting pushed forward and helped along the road and moving on. It's the presence of God. That's why it says here that Potiphar noticed that the presence of God was on Joseph's life. There was prosperity on his life. We say, that's great, Pastor. That's great. How do we keep the presence of God? How do we know that the presence of God is going to keep abiding on us? If prosperity only comes with the presence of God, then I got to have the presence of God. And if I have the prosperity, I know I have the presence of God. If I have the presence of God, I'm going to have prosperity. But, what is it? What is it that might give me some assurance that the presence of God will remain, and the presence of God stays, and the presence of God will come? What is it? What do you think? Let's look at it. What's the key? The big O word. Obedience. Oh, that's not a bad word either. That's not a 4-letter word either. That is not a bad word, obedience. When we are walking in obedience to the Lord draws near. I'm not talking about your salvation. I'm not talking about any of that. You're saved, but do you realize we can still be saved and walk in disobedience? Yes, we can. Does that mean we won't go to heaven? No, we will go to heaven. We're a son of God. We're a daughter of God. We're born again of the Spirit. That is irreversible. But right here on earth, you want to be prospered here? You want the blessings of God here? You want to prosper and prosper other people and be a blessing? Then you have to walk in obedience. God will resist you. God's presence will resist you. God's presence will not come near you. He will lift. He won't leave. He won't leave, but he will lift. There's a difference. The Lord he will lift. So we must walk in this obedience with the Lord. 2 Chronicles 17, now the Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he walked in the former ways of his father David. He did not seek the Baals, but sought the God of his father, and he walked in his commandments and not according to the acts of Israel. But notice it says the Lord was with Jehoshaphat. When you see that phrase, the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, then you have to read the rest of it. Because you'll find it in the scriptures. It'll say the Lord was with him, the Lord was with him, and then, well, he was in obedience. He kept all the statutes. He kept the laws of the Lord. He was doing the obedience thing. So the Lord was with him. Why did the Lord depart from Samson? We know why. He was disobedient. But then he obeyed the Lord and he was restored. He was restored. Samson was restored at his death. But he was restored. But it was because he decided to make a wrong right and go from disobedience to obedience. Deuteronomy 10:12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord require of you? Take this personally right now, would you? Look at it and go, hey, you know what? Kadisha, what does the Lord require of you? Tim, what does the Lord require of you? Linda, what does the Lord require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. This is in the Old Testament. All your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I command you today for your good. You know what he's saying? I command you today. Anytime he says this is for your good, this is for your prosperity. Prosperity. It will prosper you to obey. The presence of the Lord will be with you, and there will be prosperity. Where the presence of the Lord is, you have done it through obedience. And we don't have time for the other two. I'm going to package all of these together in 2 weeks. We're at the picnic next week. You will have a Bible study unrelated to this. But we're going to put it all together. That you will prosper because the Lord is with you. The Lord is with you because you obey. Why do you obey? Where does the obedience come from? Faith. 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 It's because of your faith that you obey. You don't have faith because you obey. You have faith so you do obey. Not without obedience, it's impossible to please God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Because you get the faith, you're going to do the obedience. You do the obedience, you got the presence of God. You got the presence of God, you invite the prosperity, the pushing forward, the help on the road. God is there with you. And where does the faith come from? Hearing the word. In the beginning was the Word. That's it. In the beginning is the Word. In the beginning of this is the Word. The Word, the Word, the Word, the Word. You hear the Word. You don't obey. You don't obey just because of the Word. You obey because of faith. You have faith, not because you obey. You have it because you hear the Word of God. You hear the word. This is biblical, folks.